I thought maybe to get started, you could share an excerpt from your book that maybe tells us a little bit about why you wrote it and what your sort of personal kind of investment was in it.
Happily. Yeah, I'm going to read for like 5 minutes from the intro of the book, which is called Make It Make Sense, an Intro to Magical Overthinking. And I want to preface by saying that my cat, Claire, is in the room with us, and she has a lot of thoughts on this subject matter. She's not very well decorated degree-wise, but her hot takes are steaming, very spicy. Okay, here we go. The attempts I made to get out of my own head were sundry and full of nonsense. I visited a petting zoo for adults. I tried learning to meditate from a British computer voice. I stocked up on an unregulated nutrition powder called brain dust. My brain felt like dust. In the last few years, dread for no reason became one of my most frequent Google searches, as if the act of typing my feelings to a robot would make them go away. I gorged myself on podcasts about women who'd snapped, at once repulsed and tantalized by those who wore their madness on their sleeves. How good it must feel to snap, I thought. My most cinematic attempt at mental rehab involved picking herbs on a farm in Sicily under a light pollution-free sky. At night here, the stars are so close they could fall into your mouth, the herb farmer told me, sending my heart to my throat. With varying degrees of success, I was doing everything I could think of to defect from the state of overwhelm and consumption that had become my life in the roaring 2020s. Anything to gain some perspective on the mental health exigency I'd been experiencing and trying to rationalize for the better part of a decade. Every generation has its own brand of crisis. Those of the 1960s and 70s were about gaining freedom from physical tyrannies, equal rights and opportunities to vote, learn, work, mobilize. They were crises of the body. But as the century turned, so did our struggles inward. Paradoxically, the more collective progress we made, the more individual malaise we felt. Discourse about our mental unwellness crescendoed. In 2017, Scientific American declared that the nation's mental health had declined since the 1990s, and that suicide rates were at a 30-year high. 4 years later, a CDC survey found that 42% of young people felt so sad or hopeless in the last 2 weeks that they couldn't go about their normal days. The National Alliance on Mental Illness reported that between 2020 and 2021, crisis calls to their lifeline were up 251%. We're living in what they call the information age, but life only seems to be making less sense. We're isolated, listless, burnt out on screens, cutting loved ones out like tumors in the spirit of boundaries, failing to understand other people's choices or even our own. The machine is malfunctioning, and we're trying to think our way out of it. In 1961, Marxist philosopher Frantz Fanon wrote, "Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it." Our mission, it seems, has to do with the mind. Let's skip ahead a little bit. Broadly, magical thinking describes the belief that one's internal thoughts can affect external events. One of my first exposures to the concept came from Joan Didion's memoir, The Year of Magical Thinking, which vivifies grief's power to make even the most self-aware minds deceive themselves. Mythologizing the world as an attempt to make sense of it is a unique and curious human habit. In moments of fierce uncertainty, from the sudden death of a spouse to a high-stakes election season, otherwise reasonable brains start to buckle. There she goes. All right, Claire. Thanks for joining. She's bored. All right. Whether it's the conviction that one can manifest their way out of financial hardship, thwart the apocalypse by learning to can their own peaches, stave off cancer with positive vibes, or transform an abusive relationship to a glorious one with hope alone, magical thinking works in service of restoring agency. While magical thinking is an age-old quirk, overthinking feels distinct to the modern era, a product of our innate superstitions clashing with information overload, mass loneliness, and a capitalistic pressure to know everything under the sun. In 2014, Bell Hooks said, "The most basic activism we can have in our lives is to live consciously in a nation living in fantasies. You will face reality. You will not delude yourself. To become as aware as we can of the mind's natural distortions, to see both the beauty and utter folly in them. This, I believe, ought to be part of our era's shared mission. We can let the cognitive dissonance bring us to our knees, or we can board the dizzying swing between logos and pathos. We can strap in for a lifelong ride. Learning to stomach a sense of irresolution might be the only way to survive this crisis. That's precisely what this exploration of cognitive biases has helped me do. Even more than Sicilian stargazing. Writing this book has been the one thing that's kept the buzz in my head at a decibel level I can stand. The Zen Buddhists have a word, koan, which means unsolvable riddle. You break the mind in order to reveal deeper truths and reassemble the pieces to create something new. I wrote this book as a yearning, a Rorschach test, a PSA, and a love letter to the mind. It's not a system of thought, but rather something more like a koan. If you have all but lost faith in others' ability to reason, or have made a cornucopia of questionable judgments that you can't even explain, my hope is for these chapters to make some sense of the senseless, to crack open a window in our minds and let a warm breeze in, to help quiet the cacophony for a while, or even hear a melody in it. Thank you.
Thank you. So something really comes up for me at the beginning, and that is, I think about my experience kind of dedicating my life and my professional career to scientific skepticism, critical thinking, neuropsychological humility through both my sort of public science communication work, but also as a psychologist. As you sat down to write this, how did you sort of put yourself on that dialectic? Were you somebody who was like pretty credulous, who was like, I believe anything everyone tells me? Or were you already something of a skeptic?
I'm probably the worst of both, So, I guess a little bit of context is that I grew up the daughter of scientists. My dad is a neuroscientist. My mom is a cancer cell biologist. And so like our religious text was, the dictionary, like books by Darwin. We had a shrine to the theory of everything in our home. We literally Merriam-Webster's dictionary was on a pedestal in my living room growing up. That was so reverent that I remember a friend in middle school entering our house and being like, "Is this the Torah or the Bible?" And I was like, "Babe, it's the dictionary." So yeah, my parents definitely instilled in me sort of a disdain for mysticism and a real respect for scientific inquiry and skepticism. And yet I was the sort of theatrical, melodramatic one of the family who loved theater and ritual and pomp and circumstance. And so squaring those two drives was always kind of difficult for me and made me feel like somewhat of a black sheep. But I think of myself as someone who is deeply skeptical, but that can border on smug, I went into writing my last book, which is about the language of cults from Scientology to SoulCycle. So this wide spectrum of cult-like groups. I went in thinking, I think many of us probably do when we watch cult documentaries or start, investigating cults in various ways. I was thinking I would never join a group like this, I am a true skeptic. No one could ever, convince me of these totally ridiculous ideologies. And then of course, as I started looking more into it, I was like, actually, wow, a lot of these techniques of influence have really shown up in my life, maybe not in the canonical cult context, but in one-on-one dynamics that grow to resemble cults and things like that. And I had a similar, well, same, but different sort of approach to this book where I was thinking I am so so audacious to think that like I could possibly get a hold of my cognitive biases by just like learning more about them. And instead, it's sort of just this whole investigation of cognitive biases and, how that relates to this phrase that I'm coining, magical overthinking, has really been an exercise in humility, and an embrace of my own irrational tendencies that are really like universal and incredibly human, and just trying to really notice where my mysticisms are serving me and where they're not serving me, and to extend that compassion toward others as well.
Absolutely. And that really makes me think of two things. So I want to put a pin in the cognitive bias conversation because that's the next thing I want to get to. But first, that phrase, magical overthinking. So sort of in that excerpt, you mentioned, magical thinking. We kind of know what we mean when we say that. Maybe it's things that are supernatural or things that are like pseudo-religious or spiritual, things outside of the natural, testable scientific realm. But overthinking, this is a modern and kind of new approach. So combining the two, help us understand a little bit better. What is magical overthinking?
Yeah, well, I really conceive of it as this clash between our resource rationality. The ways that we make decisions in everyday life are really predicated on our limited time, limited memory storage, limited cognitive resources in various ways. And that throughout human history has caused us to conclude a lot of things, to infuse a sort of like cosmic logic into events that don't make other kinds of sense to us. And that's a coping mechanism, and it's very human, and it has for a long time not been all that much of a problem. We've always used, cognitive biases and our imperfect decision-making strategies, and at times, really superstitious magical thinking as a way to make sense of the world enough to survive it. But my argument is that the problems that we are now tasked with contending with every single day are simply more abstract and complex and disembodied than the problems our brains develop to handle. And that is what's causing so much of the overthinking that we're experiencing. I have found that this idea of like thought spiraling and, overthinking and underthinking all the wrong things, like spiraling out at night over some, Instagram comment that you like can't parse out exactly what it means, but then jumping to conclusions about some subject matter that you truly know nothing about, but you're like, oh yes, I feel very confident in my, conclusions about that. That is like such an interesting phenomenon. Like, why are we not like poring over these more complex ideas, or instead like up at night thinking about like some dumb thing we said 3 years ago at a party? So I really find that, our cognitive biases, our innate decision-making strategies are just like clashing with modern society. And that collision is what I'm referencing as magical overthinking.
Makes sense. And I think it's so, relevant for where we are all today. Completely social media addicted, completely, doom scrolling every single night of our lives. And so I'm curious, one of the things that you talk about quite a bit in the book is this concept of cognitive biases, right? These things that we all fall victim to. These are just kind of like evolved ways of thinking that help us make sense of the world. I have long thought that, I don't know, like confirmation bias is kind of the mother of all cognitive biases. Like it subsumes quite a few of them. But I'm curious which ones you chose to focus on the book and why.
Yeah. So the sort of like lens or motif of the book, my like way into exploring this really massive idea of magical overthinking, was through cognitive biases. This is a term coined by the late behavioral economists and real life besties, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman just passed away 3 weeks ago, which was like, so it felt magical, I immediately like projected some superstitiousness on
coincidence.
Okay.
Yes.
Coincidence. Yes.
Yes.
The way that the human mind tends to misattribute cause and effect would lead me to think otherwise. Anyway, but Anywho, I remember coming across an infographic that laid out like 200 plus of the cognitive biases that have been described over the years, and selecting the 11 that I use as sort of themes for each of the chapters in the book was a pretty intuitive process. I mean, all on their own, these different cognitive biases aren't difficult to understand, actually. Like, you can pretty easily absorb like an academic paper about confirmation bias or zero sum bias, and I think that's really cool. These papers are not necessarily like the most accessible in the entire world, but it's not like jumping right into a physics paper, like it actually,
Yeah.
concepts are not that difficult to understand if you dig in. But I basically, I read a bunch of papers, and it became clear to me intuitively which ones felt the most urgent, relevant to the larger zeitgeist. I could immediately, upon reading about the halo effect, see how it applied to the cycles of celebrity worship and dethronement that we see in our society. I could immediately see how reading a few papers on proportionality bias could explain the like mass embrace of Instagram manifestation gurus that I was noticing in my community. And so that was like a really intuitive process, but it was also nice to have the constraint of cognitive biases to know where to go in the book, because otherwise I think this subject could have been really unwieldy.
What about the phenomenon that occurs when somebody who's putting in a lot of work to know thy biases, this idea of neuropsychological humility, sort of, I know I'm going to fall victim to these things. This is a very human experience. So trying to understand myself better may make me a little bit more aware and therefore a little less likely. Yet something kind of happens when you start to operate in this way, that you see them all around you. And I'm curious, how have you navigated the social component of being aware of cognitive biases? When do you say something? When do you not? When do you not want to be that person who steps in? What's that been like for you, having put so much effort into this work?
I'm totally that person with like my close friends and family. I think it would not play well to like be in some kind of debate or argument with someone that you don't know particularly well. Not like I'm constantly arguing with people that I know particularly well, but if I'm engaging in some exchange of ideas with someone and me like noticing that a particular cognitive bias, whether it's like survivorship bias or whatever it is, and like clocking that in the moment, you just
Right.
like a know-it-all. I would not endorse that. But something that I learned while researching the book that at first seemed disheartening, but now I feel like is a hopeful sentiment, is that we're pretty bad at changing other people's minds with facts. Like, it's not effective. This. But we're pretty okay at changing our own minds and like reframing things for ourselves. So, as I move through the world, behaviors in other people or in myself that would otherwise seem so confounding to me that I might write them off or myself off as like maybe fundamentally evil or like a ding dong, like just someone who doesn't make sense and whose behavior like has no rationale, and thus like they're a bad person or I'm a bad person. I'm now able to sort of identify the motivational factors, not really as an excuse, but as an explanation. And that helps me forgive myself. It helps me forgive other people, instead of just like writing off us all as these like hopeless nincompoops. And so that's been really healing.
It's also really indicative of a sort of growth as opposed to a fixed mindset, and somebody who believes or endorses things like rehabilitation. There's a very kind of classic study where psychologists asked people, do you believe in evil? Like the concept of pure evil. And those who tended to believe in pure evil were less likely to endorse things like rehabilitation in prisons. And they were more likely to endorse just long sentences and keeping people out of the public sphere. And so it's interesting that there is that correlation between if you can attribute somebody's actions to their previous experiences, their life, lots of circumstances, you're going to be more flexible in your thinking and believe that people can change and grow and learn new things, which I think is an important component of being aware of your magical overthinking.
Yeah.
So I want to turn to the Q&A, and just to remind everybody who's watching right now, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, because I'm going to be pulling from that throughout the hour. So we've got one here from Rajiv Gupta, who said, I'm wondering if this book or its content was more relevant for women as the author began to write it. I would imagine that overthinking would cripple all indiscriminately. No, but that does raise an interesting question about sort of, is there a gender component to your approach to this book? And was there any crossover with sort of modern feminism or conversations about the patriarchy?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, I have a biased lens, of course, and so I'm going to be attracted toward scenarios that feel applicable to me. So, yeah, there are gender dynamics discussed in this book that are from a more feminist perspective. There's a chapter in the book called The Shit-Talking Hypothesis, and that addresses a cognitive bias called zero-sum bias, which some might recognize our tendency to think that another person's gain inherently means your loss, which isn't always true and is almost never true when applied to sort of abstract modern currencies like success or beauty or clout, but was once very much applicable to stiff competition with limited resources like mates and food many millennia ago. And because of my lens and my personal interests and who I am, I wanted to explore zero-sum bias in the context of social comparison. And, women are found to make more upward social comparisons and downward identifications, meaning like when they survey, all of the people that they follow on their Instagram feed or a room full of people, they will tend to compare themselves only to the people that they perceive as superior. Not naturally, this is a result of conditioning, but that was so interesting and felt like really applicable to my own life and healing to learn about. But another person writing The Age of Magical Overthinking with a different background and a different gender identity, I'm sure would have chosen different subject matter. But in fact, I'm not a behavioral economist. I'm using these cognitive biases as a motif. But formal behavioral economics books written by PhDs, which are fascinating and which I cite throughout this book, usually are written by men. Yeah. So there's a lot out there on how this stuff applies to those who've been socialized male. And I thought it would be fun to sort of apply them in a more intimate context. Sometimes a more girly context, if you will.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm curious, because you were sort of talking about your own personal experience and learning these things and writing the book and how much you related to this zero-sum bias. Are there any other biases that you came across or that you did a deep dive on that you were like, that's me, I do that all the time, I need to work on this?
Oh, well, like all of them, I mean, there's one that I touch on briefly in my chapter on the sunk cost fallacy, which is our proclivity to think that resources already spent on an endeavor, money, time, but also emotional resources like hope or secrets, justify spending even more. There's a study that I quote in that chapter that has to do with additive versus subtractive solution bias. So we as human beings, quite naturally, but especially those of us who grow up in consumerist societies, when faced with a problem, our tendency is to want to add a whole bunch of variables to the equation as an attempt for a solution, when oftentimes the much more efficient but less intuitive solution to the problem would be to take something away. So the study that I cite pertained to inviting participants to solve a problem involving, colored blocks. It was like a spatial puzzle by either adding or subtracting colored blocks. And the vast majority of people opted for the much more cumbersome additive solution of, putting more colored blocks onto the assortment. Very few people decided on the subtractive solution, which was much quicker and more efficient, which was just to take one single block away to solve the problem. And this was mind-blowing to me because it has applied to so many arenas of my life. In that chapter, I talk about a one-on-one sort of cult-like relationship that I justified as a victim of the sunk cost fallacy to myself for years and years and years. Every time the relationship got especially bad, I would dig my heels in. I would justify my efforts. And this additive versus subtractive solution bias stuff was really interesting because it made me reflect and realize, oh yeah, like during our most painful moments in that relationship, I thought, we'll fix this problem. Not breaking up. No. That never even occurred to me. I was like, we should go on another vacation, or we should replace all our furniture. Like it was this very
Let's have a kid.
Yeah, thank God. Oh my God, thank God. I have a whole bunch of cats though. I was like, cats will solve it. I regret none of my cats. But so that's a high stakes example. A lower stakes example might be, this is a real example from my life. I was looking at my junk drawer in my house the other week and it was such a mess. I was like, you know what I need to do? I need to go to the Container Store and get some like really aesthetic acrylic drawer organizers. Like that'll solve my junk drawer problem. It's like, just throw things away, So becoming aware of biases like that has actually had like a real serviceable effect on my life. That's one that really comes to mind.
It's really interesting as you're kind of sharing this with us, because I am I'll admit it, I love a good poker game. And so many of these things have allegories in poker. You can almost see the microcosm at the table and then the macrocosm in real life. And so it makes me curious, are you a gamer at all? Do you play poker?
I play poker with my family. Yeah. Texas Hold'em. Yeah. I really try not to, I'm not a gambler. I really try not to fall victim to sunk cost fallacy when playing poker. Like I will fold so fast, maybe too fast. My skill in poker, I would say is probably reading. This is not a skill. Poker is fun for me because I love how bad my dad's poker face is. And I'm highly.
So you're very good at reading your father specifically at the poker table.
It's like Karen in Mean Girls when she's like, my boobs can tell when it's about to rain. Actually, they can tell when it's raining. That's me. Sorry, I shouldn't say the word boobs and my dad in the same sentence. Quickly move on.